Hey, what's up everyone? This is Mr. Bear. Today we will be discussing the pivotal events leading up to the Civil War. As most of you remember, tension over slavery, the single greatest cause of the Civil War, is at an all-time high. Fanning the flames of this tension was Harry Beecher Stowe's 1852 book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Angry over the Fugitive Slave Act, Stowe wanted to demonstrate to the North the wickedness of slavery. The book was about the splitting up of a slave family and the cruel mistreatment of likable Uncle Tom by a cruel slave master. The book sold millions of copies. It was kind of as popular as Harry Potter would be today, and overseas British people were moved by it. The South hated it and said Stowe's portrayal of slavery was wrong and unfair. It really wasn't though, and as a result the book brought the morality argument to the forefront, leading many to support the abolitionist movement and disobey the Fugitive Slave Act. And for the thousands of kids who read it in the North, it encouraged many to join the war. Abraham Lincoln, when meeting Stowe, said that "You're the little woman who wrote the book that made this great war." And you can really see that Uncle Tom's Cabin and the impending crisis of the South had a direct impact on the Civil War. The next big event leading to the Civil War occurs in Kansas. Now, the last time we talked about Kansas, we had talked about Stephen Douglas, this guy, and the KansasNebraska Act. And the plan was basically to repeal the Missouri Compromise's 3630 ban on slavery and allow popular sovereignty to decide the question of slavery in Kansas and Nebraska. And it was basically assumed that Kansas would be a slave state and Nebraska would be a free state. Now, out of this is going to be a lot of opposition, especially in political matters, and a new party is going to form, known as the Republican Party, and it was basically made up of those who oppose slavery spreading in Western territories, and it's going to be made up of a hodgepodge of different individuals. And it's important to note that this is a party that is only popular in the North and really did not have a following in the South at all. So with the question of slavery up in the air, pro and anti-slavery groups are going to flood into Kansas. Specifically, the New England Immigrant Aid Company sent over 2,000 anti-slavery folks to Kansas, and the pro-slavery individuals from Missouri, who gained the name Border Ruffians, are also going to pour into Kansas. And so Southerners are going to be furious because they had agreed to the KansasNebraska Act under the guise that Kansas would be a slave state. But the result was that two governments are going to be established, a pro-slavery government in Lecompton and an anti-slavery group in Topeka. And the fact that two illegal governments are going to set up in Kansas demonstrates the failure of Douglas's KansasNebraska Act. And really, we see an insane course of events that are going to follow. The course of events that I was referring to involves Kansas descending into fighting and bloodshed, giving it the name Bleeding Kansas. This is going to begin with the sack of Lawrence in May of 1856, when pro-slavers are going to attack a group of free soilers from Massachusetts. Now, there was only one death, but the abolitionists were extremely angry at this sort of violence. In steps the radical abolitionist named John Brown, who, with his group of followers, many of which were made up of his over 10 different children, he is going to believe that he had a mandate from God to avenge what happens at Lawrence. And so he is going to do just that 3 days later, when he is going to lead his followers on an attack at Pottawatomie Creek that ends with 5 pro-slavers being hacked to death. Now, although the violence was not supported by abolitionists, pro-slavers are going to respond with anger, and we are going to see armed posses roaming Kansas, and the state is going to descend into civil war. With Kansas bleeding, things are about to get bloody in the US Senate, with one of the most bizarre events in the antebellum years. In 1856, Northern abolitionist Charles Sumner is going to give a speech insulting numerous Southern politicians, including South Carolina Senator Andrew Butler. And upon hearing about the speech, Butler's distant cousin and fellow South Carolinian, Preston Brooks, is going to decide that since Sumner's not a gentleman, he's going to beat Sumner with an 11-ounce cane. Yes, an 11-ounce cane. Blood is going to spew all over the floor. Sumner's going to have damage to his brain and nervous system. He's not going to be able to return to the Senate for at least 3.5 years. You can see that things have officially gotten out of control, and violence has now spread into politics. This is going to increase sectionalism in terms of politics and increase political division. With bloodshed throughout the country, it was an election year. The Democrats ditched Pierce and ran James Buchanan, a senator from Pennsylvania who had been serving overseas for Pierce and was actually the politician involved in the Ost-10 Manifesto. Now, Buchanan was chosen because he was not tainted by the Kansas-Nebraska controversy, thus avoiding the issue of slavery. Republicans, on the other hand, boosted by support from anger over the Brooks beatdown of Sumner, they were able to have a pretty strong convention and nominate their first presidential candidate, the wild explorer and adventurer Captain John C. Fremont, who, in my opinion, is a pretty strong lookalike candidate for Josh Groban. A new third party also emerged, and they were known as the Know Nothing Party. They were named this after their secretive nature, and they were mostly made up of nativists or people who were anti-immigrant. Now, they were protesting the recent influx of Irish and German immigrants arriving due to the famine in their country, and they were also anti-Catholic. Now, Buchanan is going to win the election, but the Republicans are going to consider their performance a moral victory, and they are going to begin preparing for the upcoming 1860 election. Buchanan's presidency was marked by crisis after crisis, and his first crisis occurred in 1857 when Kansas, who was still fighting over the slavery question, applied for statehood. While devising a constitution, pro-slavers wrote the Lecompton Constitution, which essentially said that slavery would continue in Kansas no matter what the state decided. And Buchanan is going to support the Lecompton Constitution and Kansas becoming a slave state. This is going to really tick off Northern Democrats and abolitionists throughout the country, and Buchanan is going to single-handedly split the last nationalist political party, the Democrats. And so a group known as the Southern Democrats are going to emerge and support Buchanan, while Northern Democrats are going to completely oppose him. And fortunately for the country, we are going to see Congress reject the Constitution and force a rewrite. The next big issue of Buchanan's presidency was the Dred Scott case, one of the most important cases in U.S. history. This case was pretty simple. Dred Scott was a slave in the South, and he had moved to the North with his master. He lived in the North as a slave for 5 years, and he is going to sue for his freedom, citing that since slavery didn't exist in a free state, he should have his freedom. But the Chief Justice at the time, a guy by the name of Roger Taney, who, sadly does look like that, he is going to take this simple case and warp it. Instead of giving Scott his freedom, the court came out against Scott. They declared that black slaves were not citizens and therefore could not sue. They also added that since slaves were private property, as a result, slavery could be brought basically into any state. And lastly, it said that Congress could make no laws regarding slavery in the West. So you can say goodbye to the Missouri Compromise because they declare that unconstitutional. Southerners were obviously delighted by the decision, as it opened up slavery to the whole country, while Northerners were outraged, and in fact Republicans declared that they wouldn't even listen to the decision, which really angers a lot of Southern Democrats who now wonder how long they can live in a country with Northerners who won't even listen to the Supreme Court. If Buchanan hadn't already failed enough, his presidency is going to get even worse when a financial panic hits. It's caused by issues in Europe and an influx of gold in California, and while this is largely out of Buchanan's control, his support for a new tariff, which helped the South and hurt Northern agriculture and industry, basically put the nail in the coffin for his presidency. I mean, if you look at the picture on the bottom right, it's the face of a man who has completely failed as president, and it should be no surprise to you that he is considered the worst president in U.S. history. I'm honestly just trying to figure out who failed more, Buchanan or these people. In 1858, Democrat Stephen Douglas was up for re-election. His challenger was one of my political heroes, a 6'4", 180-pound man named Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was raised in a Kentucky log cabin who had less than a year of formal schooling and was known for weightlifting and splitting logs for fence rails. He married Mary Todd, who was part of a wealthy Kentucky family, and was a lawyer known for refusing to take immoral cases, hence his nickname, Honest Abe. He had a short stint in Congress as a Whig, then transitioned to the Republican Party and challenged Douglas for his seat. Lincoln challenged Douglas to 7 debates, and this is a David and Goliath battle because Douglas is one of the best debaters in the country. Lincoln's logical debate style, however, is going to win over crowds and gain national attention. And in the most famous debate in Freeport, Lincoln is going to challenge Douglas on the Dred Scott issue, asking that if people in a Western territory want to ban slavery, and the Supreme Court says they can't, who will win, the Supreme Court or the people? And so Douglas is going to respond with the Freeport Doctrine, which says that slavery can be limited in the West, standing by his popular sovereignty belief. And the South is going to be furious because Douglas just ignored the Dred Scott issue. However, Douglas is going to end up winning the election, and Lincoln is also going to benefit. He is going to gain national attention for the debates and especially his famous speech called the House Divided speech. And Lincoln is now going to look to 1860 to potentially run as president. In 1859, John Brown hatched a plan to invade the South, seize its arms, and call upon slaves to rise up and revolt, and take over the South while freeing all slaves. Pretty intense plan if you ask me. His first step was to get more weapons by raiding a federal arsenal found at Harpers, Ferry, West Virginia. The plan went downhill fast though, when innocent civilians died, and Brown was captured by the U.S. military under future Confederate General Robert E. Lee. After a speedy trial, Brown was hung. The North saw him as a martyr, the South was happy with his death, but wondered how long they could live with Northerners who supported this kind of violence. Southerners especially targeted Republicans, who they thought supported Brown despite Republicans speaking out against the use of violence. John Brown's failed invasion is an immediate cause of secession because the South felt under attack. This leads us to the election of 1860. As discussed, the Democrats are split over the issue of popular sovereignty and slavery. Northern Democrats nominate Stephen Douglas. Southern Democrats elect the current VP, John Breckinridge, supported by the Fire Eaters. Breckinridge wanted to keep slavery in the South and also allow it to spread to the West and also make Cuba a new slave state. With the Democrats a mess, a new party made up of Whigs and the Know-Nothings called the Constitutional Union Party nominated John Bell, and he wanted to make a compromise and basically try to keep the country together. The Republicans nominated Honest Abe, who they called the Little Giant Killer, who was attractive to Northerners because he offered a multitude of different protections and guarantees, with also saying he would not expand slavery out west. The South argued that if Lincoln won, they were out. And the election is really represented in this cartoon, with Douglas and Lincoln arguing over the West, Breckinridge tearing the South, and Bell trying to glue the country together. The result is that the Republican Party wins for the first time. The problem is that Lincoln was a minority president. He had less than 40% of the popular vote. He was not supported at all in the South, and Southerners don't even put him on the ballot in 10 states. And by the time Lincoln reads the oath of office, 7 states are going to have broken away. The 7 states form the Confederate States of America, or the Confederacy. Their president was former Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, and not surprisingly, James Buchanan continued to be a complete failure of a president by doing absolutely nothing to stop the South from leaving. With the nation falling apart, one last attempt is made to preserve the Union. This is known as the Crittenden Compromise. It was basically an attempt to preserve the Union by appeasing the South or giving in to what the South wanted. The compromise stated that there would be no slavery above the 3630 line, but there could be slavery below that and in new territories like Cuba. Lincoln is going to outright deny this compromise as it went against his platform of no slavery in the West. Thus, the South felt justified in their decision to break away and form the Confederate States of America. They viewed the struggle like the patriots who broke away from King George during the Revolution, calling Lincoln King Abraham Lincoln. As we're going to see though, they're completely misguided. Their judgment is way different than when the colonies broke away from England. As you can see, every aspect of the nation has been destroyed by the issue of slavery. Despite numerous attempts to compromise, sectionalism has gone so far that a whole new nation has been formed. In the coming years, we will see the North and South descend into civil war, with the question of reconciliation hanging in the balance. We will see what is to come in the next chapter. Thanks for watching, everyone.